So, so to answer back to originally what Upgrade was asking me, I did reply him shortly, regarding what is the country's reaction. I have to say, although morally, ethically, it looks like wow, this is so evil. United States doing evil thing again. They disrespect people's sovereignty and whatnot. But actually, if you think from a position of a US partner, finally you have the global cop back. The US is the world cop, right? The world police. For a long time, we have said the US has the world police, and for the recent 10 years or so, they stopped becoming the police. For maybe 10, 15 years, they have stopped becoming the police. Instead, they become the mafia. They become the country that went around the world to smash things instead of being the police. So US has been always known as the police, the world police. So for past 20 years,
operation. This is not policing operation. This is mafia type operation. So police is not bad.
But that depends on how you see it, right? So
what
the thing
mean?
is, what is the world police job? Okay, let's put it that way. We have to look at from a different perspective. It might sound very pro-US, but you have to look from the perspective from the world international order, which is led and ruled by the United States. United States is the ruler. So that when we talk about international law, in the rule-based order, what is the rule? What is the law? US is the law, US is the rule. So everybody's supposed to follow United States. Any countries that do not follow United States threaten the system. So everybody, every partner, every European country, Singapore, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, everyone that follows the United States try to protect the system. Any country that step out of line, they become a threat to the system. So for example, that's why Venezuela got targeted, Iran got targeted, China got targeted, because they stepped out of line. Russia is the sad one because Russia was pushed out of the system. They actually want to stay in the system, but they kick them out. So otherwise, even if you look at Putin, even Putin understand that it's important for Russia to stay within the system, follow US regulations, follow US led rules, because if you destroy the system, then what we're going to get is the colonial era, where the different powers start to compete. It's going to get very scary and complicated, and a lot of people is going to die because there will be wars. So even Putin understand that. That's why Putin was puzzled. When the Ukraine war thing, all this, how it triggers the Ukraine war, because he's like, what the fuck is the United States doing? You are messing up the whole thing. So if you look from that perspective, where the system is important, and that everybody have been putting their political capital and faith in USA for a long time. And finally, US is finally willing to take action. I believe actually a lot of countries, the leaders are actually feeling relief that at least United States under Trump willing to do the difficult job. Because if you look from, for example, Obama era, what I always say, like on this open mic, I say quite a few times, how Obama screwed up Southeast Asia. Because when China was reclaiming the islands to build the military bases, Obama did not do anything. He did not send a warship to stop the reclaiming of the islands. And when they finished reclaiming, they militarized it. Now it became a military base. There's no way, not even United States military dare to go too close. It becomes a problem. It becomes a permanent problem for Southeast Asia. And in fact, strategic problem for United States. Because now they can deny the US Navy even further through surface to surface missile. So the willingness to take action is very important, because if not, for example, my country or any country, pro-US country, put all their faith in United States. Like what happened to Ukraine, right? They put all his faith in NATO, in Europe, in United States. And when shit happened, they never come. This is a fear, right? This is the main fear, like for Japan, for Taiwan, for Singapore, for any other pro-US countries. What if we really go into serious trouble, and then we needed United States and they don't come? That is a scary thing. That's why when United States willing to do this kind of thing, for example, striking Iran, maybe that was like an Israel thing. Everybody think that Israel control United States. Okay, sure. But then how about Venezuela? They're willing to take out the president of a country just like this, and able to do it perfectly. So I believe a lot of countries, pro-US, I'm talking about pro-US, will feel very relieved. Especially, I think the new partners in the Middle East. I think especially in Asia, in Southeast Asia, in East Asia, US, Japan, South Korea. No, not US, I mean Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, all will feel a bit more relief that, okay, now we have a USA that is willing to do things. because United States have for a long time refused to do things, and that screws up
but
everybody's life.
when you say that policing have returned, what was the difference
Oh,
from when you
may
said
I
that
explain?
it
Like,
was mafia behavior? Well, I don't
may I
see the
chime in on
difference.
that one? Because that's the only thing reason I hold a finger. A
Yeah,
state is the mafia. The only dispute is to what degree, right? If you're talking about the mafia, it's like protection money, right? How is that any different from tax, right? You get protection money to be protected from other gangs, but if you do not pay protection money, it will fuck you up. Likewise, in the state, any state, you pay protection, you pay taxes, so you have police and law enforcement on your side. But if you don't, they are against you, right? No different whatsoever. So what White is saying with like I agree with him, not because in the sense that the police are the good ones and the mafia are not. No, they're all mafias to a varying degree. It's that they are policing their own sphere, right? They are actually doing what they are set themselves claiming. I demand protection money. You are using U.S. services and are within the sphere of influence, but really our only involvement is going to be totally detached from any mutual interest. We're not totally detached, but they have been basically, pissing off not only foes but also friends, right? And that's not a policing. That's just reckless governance, be it a mafia or not. So that's really where I don't think that why I do not perceive that why it says that it's a policing in the good sense. No, it's that you're actually just asserting control where you claim control, and
Yeah.
that's how I interpret that.
Yeah. So, for example, what's the job of the police? The police is to enforce the law. But what is the law? The law is United States. United States is the law. International law is United States law. Whatever United States want, that's the law. That's the international order, which is why they always say the international community. What is the international community? That's US allies and partners. That's US. That's the international community. Everyone else, you're not part of the international community. So no, that's the idea. The world police polices the law set by the United States, which is the rules set by the United States. That's the rule-based order. So when they say they want to enforce the rule-based order, that is a US order. So no, it's just that this is more blunt way of saying. And in the past, USA like to be virtual signaling, right? But Trump has been more straightforward. Trump administration has been more blunt about it, which is good. That means no one is going to has misunderstanding of what is what. They literally just say we're going to enforce the Monroe Doctrine. Good, which means we don't need to guess whether what they're going to do. We know they're going to enforce it. Upgrade.
Yeah, but here comes the problem, right? Here comes the problem. You say that you need to play by the rules, but the rules change all the time according to what you think is right. That's the big problem with the international community because you setting rules and then when you don't like the rules that you self put in place, you just change them whatever you want. And that's the big problem with the international community who now you can see since like 5 years, like maybe 10 years in the brewing, right? That people start to say, wait a minute, you just said that we shouldn't invade countries. You invade countries by yourself. And then when we invade countries, you say that we are bad and you put sanction on us, put pressure on us because we are the bad guys. And that's the same what happened with Europe, right? Russia very bad, right? Russia invades other countries. Meanwhile, bombing Libya, bombing Iraq, bombing this, right? But that's okay, right? Because we are the right. We are
Like
the
the
bad guys, you
democracy
know?
thing.
Exactly, it's the same with the democracy thing, and people are tired of this because they see it that it's not a logical thing, right? It's not something you can follow because, like I said, when you step out of something which the country which is number one don't like, then you are targeted, right? You're the enemy. You are not the good guy, right? Like Venezuela, for example, right? Or for example, Russia, or for example, like even in European room, right? Romania don't vote like we want. We just pretend that some TikTok influenced the election, and then we just overrule it, and then all of a sudden some guy who we like come in power, right? So that's what the international community is complaining about, right? I understand what you mean, Wyatt, with you're the top dog, you're gonna put the rules and you're gonna bend the rules how you want because you can do that, right? And nobody can inflict you any harm because they don't have the power. They bitch a lot, That's the problem, right? BRICS. Oh, we are strong. We are together and stuff like that. Almost like a BRICS country, we can say a BRICS very near country, right? Got their president kidnapped. What are you doing? As a community like the European Union, you should put all the sanctions you can on the United States. Will they do that? Of course not, because they want to do business, they want to do money, and the United States is making a lot of money to these countries. That's why it's hypocritical also from their part, right? You're always complaining about this kind of actions, but you're not doing anything. You're limp dick.
This is
You just
this is the
pretend that you
problem.
can do something. Yeah.
That's why I say just now, right? The problem is because people like to virtual signal. That's the problem. Everybody pretend that no, it's not this thing. But for thousands of years, the powerful country has always exerted their might on other countries or other kingdoms. Always been like this. Invading another country is normal. That's why the department is always known as Department of War. Has always been like this. War department. Every country is war department. It's only the past 100 years, suddenly they decided, oh, we need to be defense because everybody want to be nice, because, they try to, act as if that they are very virtuous. But then when shit comes to the fan, oh no, we still have to invade. They have no choice. So this is the hypocrisy. The reality is that there is no law. There is no international law that everybody follows. There is only the regulation, the law, or the system that United States decides, and everybody must follow. Which is why if you look at Trump's explanation, when he tells other countries, he say, focus on your country, make it follow, do as per your national interest, and then we negotiate. No, he will be America first, but if you're from Canada, be Canada first. If you're from Europe, be Europe first. Then we negotiate. That is what Trump wants because it's simpler. He don't want countries to be virtual signaling, to act as if that, oh, we all must be virtuous, and then you do things against your national interest. What happens when you do that is that you become unpredictable. You become irrational actors. In diplomacy, in geopolitics, we call this irrational actors. For example, supporting Ukraine to the end is irrational. There is no way you can analyze and put this into your equation because it don't make sense. Why the hell is Europe destroying their own economy to support Ukraine, which have actually nothing to do with them? That's irrational actions. And for analysts, for example, like for personally myself, it makes no sense. It's like I would have never guessed it because I would have never analyzed and come up with a conclusion that countries are willing to destroy themselves to support Ukraine. So that's irrational. So that's what Trump is trying to push, is that everybody should be rational, take care of your own country. Then we negotiate and find common ground. It's easier that way, I think coping is next. Because coping have his finger first, I think.
Yeah, I believe it's me. I'll try to be short. The thing with international law, the hypocrisy is actually, as far as I'm concerned, inevitable because the international law is a logical contradiction in and of by itself. I think the most brilliant or concise way to point it was the way that Toby did. And to shorten that further, he basically said that the international law is a contradiction by definition. Because if you think of law, it's sovereign law, meaning I am the sovereign. Within these territories, I rule and nobody else. As soon as there's anything else above it, you're no longer sovereign. Hence, the international law cannot actually work in enough by itself. That's why you don't have any UN peacekeeping forces, moving in the same way as, for example, the United States is doing. So, and nobody will accept that, of course. It's just to a very limited extent, and that's why we're seeing it only a few places. The more conducive way, I think, is of viewing of international law is similar to like what was this point, the meeting of the Alaska summit, right, with Putin and Trump, right? It's just not because, oh, okay, now we're going to meet because it's going to definitely result in something. No, it's a constant iteration because we are dealing with vastly complex, societies apart with societies, and all of this interconnected. So it's to create like iterations that will enable one to align one way with an understanding that works for all. That's where the whole concept of memorandum of understanding and letters of intent, all these meeting and conferences, and those are there for that reason. And the international fora is perhaps maybe ideally, but also in a practical sense, meant to be just that, where you can, okay, we can voice some agreements or disagreements on things we would perhaps not really even bother to discuss necessarily on a bilateral one. And we would not have the blocks here to be forming, just like, let's say, the DPA open mic, right? You would instead just have like, okay, we're doing our things and we're doing their things. Imagine a Cold War without the UN, right? That will be an even blacker, a bigger gap, a blacker hole, so to speak, between the United States and the USSR, which could have increased the problems. So it's not that the international law. I think it's better to view as like, rather than the ideal that many have, that we're going to have all this, no, we're never ever going to effing agree on everything like that. It's just simply impossible because we are positioned elsewhere. We have different outsets, and we got to operate with our own self-interest, which is actually why I'm also fully in agreement with Wyatt when it comes to Trump considering the nationalistic aspect, the self-interest aspect, to be simpler. Because it may seem like, hold on, if you have a more like globalizing or more universalistic approach to it, that should be simplifying it. No? Yes, of course, on paper that would be the case. But what are we actually seeing in nations? We are seeing tribalism, nationalism, and supranationalism all messed up in a soup, with the various threads going throughout all over the place. What's happening in the United States pans out in Europe, but it's not necessarily congruent. It's convictions and dogmas that complicate the politics tremendously. And so that's why Trump is kind of viewing that, okay, we should maybe just go a little bit back to the old places, because then we can have everyone in their neat little boxes and they do their own little thing. Democratic or dictatorship is actually like ancillary. It's maybe preferable that they're democratic, but ultimately irrelevant. So I'll end with this, because I'm sorry, I may went on a little bit of a tangent, but one thing I think is important to point out is the because the upgrade touched on something I think is shouldn't be overlooked. It is true, it's hypocritical because of the inherent contradictions that but we should not be altering these borders and whatever. And then you see that exactly what's happening, right? You can Kosovo, perfect example. And on that note, with Kosovo, Somaliland, right? Why Somaliland? Actually, you can easily attribute that in part to Russia, right? Because Russia decided, like, okay, you know what? We just put the thumb right in your nose at that so-called order of yours. We are going to follow our own interest, just like you're saying in some cases. Okay, so now they're doing it, and now with the Israelis are being more or less concluding the much of the conflicts, or at least not concluding it, but they're the more the situation has calmed down a bit. So what is noteworthy here is that the Israelis are being. It's not that the Israelis are actually recognizing Somaliland; it is that they are first, right? This is notable. The first one should have been Ethiopia, but Ethiopia resisted on so many levels, both by the African Union, neighboring countries, etc., that ultimately they will be number two most likely. And why is it important that Israel is number one? Because that sets a precedence, and it's also a signal. Just like with the Russians, when they put the thumb right into it, like, no, we're going to do it our own way. We're not going to follow the conventions, because that's what international law is. International law is like a rough estimate of an agreement how we want to do things, but it's not really binding. And so when the Israelis are doing this, I perceive this to be, when they're doing that, how important is Somaliland? Maybe important, and maybe it's also a nice way to kind of counter Turkey, because they are now getting closer to Israel. And how is that a good way to counter Turkey? Not just outside the Middle East, it's actually right next to Israel and Syria, because what you have there, the Druze. Should the Druze, they haven't done so anywhere as far as I've seen it, but there are more and more talks of them talking about sovereignty, because they cannot really see this concept of Syria ever working for them again. And the Israelis, while they're hesitant of doing that, and actually cannot do that yet, because the Europeans and the Americans want to keep Syria together for the Qatari pipeline and whatever reason, that if that ends, and or the Druze, they decide to have like a more popular movement towards sovereignty, be it if it is an Israeli psyop or not, is irrelevant. The point is that the precedence with the recognition of Somaliland makes it that much more tenable for the Israelis to acknowledge that, even if it's not full sovereignty, then an autonomous zone of the Druze area. Not too dissimilar from what the Russians did exactly in the Donbass area, right? So you see, this is like, oh, you're doing it. Well, then I'm doing it too. And then the international law will be more like, hold on, but weren't we supposed to not to? So we'll just see how this goes. But yeah, sorry for the ram. I think it's Euro.
One was before me, but he's busy now. But okay, where I see this hypocrisy, it's not so much about hypocrisy of the international rule that I have a problem with. That majority of people see the problem in geopolitics, I believe, is the too big of a bite for United States. That's where majority of people see the problem. I would like to keep Western civilization around me because I belong to it. I'm more privy to it, more so I want save and not to go too risky to take a big bite against Russia and China. It's just simply self-destructive, I would say, going this way, right? As they go directly in a war case. Well, what they did in Venezuela is a part of the, right? As I explained before, Russia is wants its own sphere of influence, and United States has its own sphere of influence. This is why I would say that Russia had agreement on Venezuela with. You see, just like Cuban missiles in Cuba and Turkey, same exchange, right? Exchange it, you produce the problem, and then you negotiate it out, right? This is how they did it. This is the world politics, but it's just too big of a bite for the West to take Russia on militarily, like it's taken now, especially against China. It could be self-destructive, and I don't want to destroy the Western civilization. This is what I think is why they go against, why the rest of the world are finally, seeing the problem. They will decide, at one point to say, no, that's enough. We don't want to risk it, right? And that's why the Putin is talking about nuclear weapons and everything. Mentioning this is what was the issue, right? This is how I see it. This is where the real problem is, right? Uh, Not so much hypocrisy. I understand like so much hypocrisy from U.S. What happened here in the Balkan wars, you know, how they make up narratives, give excuses for doing bad, and then finalizing as they want, right? As the initial plan was. But they set up everything with narratives, with plans that will turn out as they want. This is what is long-term planning, and Russia is coming back to it, seeing it. China is learning. China is perfect in learning from the past, from all these, you know, NGOs and everything. That's why Russia is so much talking about foreign agents laws. China uh, are pushing those foreign agent laws because they know how they work, right? And this is the why they are too big of a bite. There's no old ways to take down Russia and China. It must be done differently. No, not such open talk and open because so many countries depend on China, on Russia, and on Ukraine, right? So many countries were importing potash and the neon gas and grain from Ukraine. They're dependent on it. That's why Russia is not going so bad until now against Ukraine, right? Now they stopped all the trade routes from Odessa because the Ukraine wanted to stop theirs, right? With all the attacks on the shipping. So this is why the rest of the what rest of the world wants from these countries depends on these countries using the payment from United States that organized all the payment system SWIFT, right? So this is how the usually United States enforced most of it, and how it forced against EU is through central bank. This is how it works. The most effective, painless, basically. I mean, bloodless, right? It's not painless; it's bloodless, which is most important. But if something happens to Russia and China, so many countries don't want it. It's just too big of a bite instead of hypocrisy. Want?
Yeah, I saw. I mean, this isn't me, and I just wonder if anyone's got any thoughts on it. But I did see some kind of like Russian doomers, or maybe like I don't know, maybe you want to say Eastern doomers if you want to throw China in there. And they were talking about how this operation in Venezuela and the fact that America went and did something, and Venezuela supposedly has friends like Russia and China, and just like Iran and Syria, these two supposed big brothers didn't apparently offer any aid or support or help them resist, the United States or whoever. And like this could hurt future, relations with Russia and China's allies, because some of their allies might start looking at them saying like, look, dude, if you get into a bind, these guys ain't got your back. Maybe the United States, they start looking to the United States. I don't know if that would really happen a lot, because I mean, I kind of agree with like what you're saying. I mean, the smart people that are kind of looking long term, that are smart, they see the value. They may not like it, but they see the value in trading Ukraine for Venezuela in the multipolar world. And whatever pole they're in, it's like, well, if you're in the Russian pole, then you're probably going to say that's a good swap. I can live with that. It sucks to lose Venezuela, but in the end, we're going to be made whole or equal or maybe a little better. We'll make out all right. So I do think there's something to that too. Like they're agreeing to swap, and then maybe some countries will shy away from the United States. Some will be more admiring of the United States, like, wow, they're so kick ass. And then in the same sense, some people might be pushed away from Russia and China because they feel like they don't really stick up for their friends. But other people might go to Russia and China because they see the plays for what they are, and they want to be in the best position they could be in as a smaller player in a multipolar world. So they might latch on to whatever big brother is going to have the best deal with the United States or China or Russia.
I mean, like,
Upgrade.
yeah, I mean, like, Russia and China helped Venezuela. It's not like they didn't help, right? They give them air defense system. They
I
bring
think
support.
what people meant was like direct help. Like, they didn't help them shoot down anything in Iran. They didn't help Assad fight back.
Yeah, sure.
And they didn't, I think that's why I've said kind of like Russian doomers, like, why didn't, Wagner
I mean, like,
go in there
Russia
and
is
help,
right now.
something. Because there was people
I mean,
saying stuff like that.
I mean, like Russia is right now in a war with Ukraine, so they're a little bit bogged down there. They have other fish to fry than to help Venezuela on the other side of the globe. And China is always trying to play this neutral. We don't want to interfere in anything, to keep like a bliss of this international rules-based order, which they try to follow, and the second that they can invade Taiwan, then this will also be over. So that's one thing. But on the other side, also what I wanted to add on what Juro said about the West, right? We are now in a period where the if you're weak, then it's not a good time for you. You need to be strong. You need to show to the world that you are strong. It doesn't matter in which way. You need to show it, if it's military, economically, or diplomatically. If you can show this one of these three options, then you toast. That's why the United States maybe intervened in Venezuela, to show some power, to show that the West is still backed up by the number one dog, who is the Western sphere, influence. And the Europeans now, they're in a little bit in a pickle, right? Because they said the entire time that Trump is a dictator. Now Trump took a dictator out of a country. So what they're gonna say? That was more my point about what I was texting with Wyatt, right? Because Europe was always, very, like you said, virtue signaling about things, right? Like about the Ukraine stuff, right? Zelensky's Churchill, right? But he's kind of a dictator too, right? But Maduro, because he's not on your side, now he is a good guy because Trump is the bad guy. So how are we gonna connect all these dots, so it makes sense. So that's why, for me, this kind of like thinking too much. You don't need to think too much sometimes in life. Sometimes things are very simple. One guy is a dictator. Okay, you might don't like him, and you want to get him away because you want to keep the power. You get him out. And the other ones, they're oh, but he is international law. Yeah, yeah, but you don't do nothing, right? Like Von said, right? You do nothing. You're just there
Yeah,
looking
grow
at
up.
them, you know. Yeah, and
Yeah,
you go into
international
the
law.
UN,
Why would you care?
and
You
you
will never care
go
about your own law, right? You
exactly.
care about international law.
Europe is not even taking care of their own country and don't take care of their own law. So how they can, you know, enforce international law, you know? So that's one point, right? And on the other side is just like they're gonna go in the UN and say how bad United States is, and the United States will go back and say how bad the other parties are, right? So it's just you know, to show, you know, it's just a big show. At the end, what is counting is the reality on the ground. It's the same, like I said, with Ukraine and Russia war. It doesn't matter how much propaganda is around this war, right? At the end, the reality will be that Russia will take some land, that will get some economical ties with the US. Europe, depending on how dumb or intelligent they are, they can switch to one or the other side, right? But there's going to be always consequences to your acts. And if you are not able to be strong either militarily or economically or diplomatically, you're gone in this period of time. There is some times in history of the planet where you need to be strong. And that's not a moment where Europe is strong. The moment is very weak. We're very weak. I think
Surprise.
coping was next, right?